This is Error 404, and this is a guide to firmware. First, let's have a look at some key terminology that you'll need to know to understand what firmware is, and we'll start off with hardware. Hardware is the devices or the physical components of a computer system or a wider machine. An example would be a keyboard, mouse, computer casing, and even something like a motherboard is classified as hardware. Other examples, of course, being the microphone I'm using right now. The monitor that I'm using is also classed as hardware. So why is that important? The firmware definition via a dictionary, so this could be your Cambridge or Oxford, no matter what dictionary you choose to use, this is the definition of firmware. It is a type of microcode or program embedded into hardware devices to allow them to operate effectively, often referred to as software for hardware. So there is an important distinction to make here, that software and firmware are two completely different things. So what are the differences between the two? Firmware provides instructions to allow hardware to start up or boot, communicate with other hardware, and perform basic input and output tasks. Software, on the other hand, is installed onto a device or system and used for interaction purposes. So this would be stuff like surfing the web or listening to music.
I'm in the thick of it, everybody knows. They know me where it snows. I skied in and they froze. I don't know nothing but no ice, I'm just cold. 40-something.
So we've covered the distinction between software and hardware. Between software and firmware, and we've looked at the definition of hardware so far. So what is firmware actually used for? Firmware is used primarily by hardware manufacturers to regularly release the updates to assure compatibility with new media or software. So for example, Android and iOS systems and gaming consoles all update in order to make the devices more efficient without physically having to change the hardware of the system. So for example, instead of upgrading your keyboard, you would have a firmware update that would allow your keyboard to be able to do something that it otherwise would not be able to do with your current settings. The primary purpose of firmware is to enhance the performance of devices.
Yes or no? In all 7 of your Tour de France victories, did you ever take banned substances or blood dope?
Yes.
Add features, so this could be anything from updating from Windows 10 to Windows 11 and getting the AI feature, for example, as well as protecting the devices from security threats, and this is often referred to as patches. Now you might know this from the gaming community, where you have patch notes.
3. Kleptomaniac Sims can no longer steal subway stations from lots. Sims can no longer woohoo in the elevator with a Sim who is on a different floor. The Grim Reaper will no longer be prevented from reaping souls due to band affiliation. Fixed a tuning issue so that Sims now vomit at acceptable levels.
This is the same thing, but for wider computing purposes. So this would be, again, for your computer tower, for moving from one operating system to another operating system along the same company, or generally trying to, get the software, the device, everything that you're using to basically perform beyond what its original means were. Now there are 2 distinct types of patches when it comes to firmware. The first one is used by Android and iOS systems alongside pretty much any mobile phone system that you can think of, and it basically periodically updates automatically. It almost forces the update to happen, and this happens again with Windows quite frequently. Again, they'll try to upgrade you from Windows 10 to Windows 11 if the system requirements meet the criteria. Whereas something like gaming consoles typically ask you or prompt you to update the system manually by basically giving your consent for the machine to be able to perform that update. Android and iOS systems are designed not to give you that permission. They are designed, yes, to let you delay it, but eventually it will update automatically. There are 3 levels of firmware, that being low level, which is stored in non-volatile memory, i.e. permanent memory, So ROM and OTP, read-only memory, of course, being sort of the main memory base of a computer system. So this would be like your hard drive, for example. Or OTP, which is one-time programmable memory. These chips can't be rewritten or updated as it is intrinsic, or it belongs to the hardware. The other two types are high level. Of course, there is a low level, so you would anticipate there'd be a high level. The high level is deployed within flash memory, so your RAM, so your random access memory. And it is the memory chips with more complex instructions that allow for updates to be made. The final type is subsystems. Now, these are semi-independent devices that are part of a wider and more extensive system. So, for example, they might be part of your motherboard on your computer. This is because firmware at this level is embedded into the CPUs, flash chips, and LCD display units. Now, I'll cover LCD in a different video, so I won't actually explain what that is.
It's the...
He doesn't know anything.
What colour is it, Joe?
But look forward to that coming soon to the channel. There are two primary types of firmware. One being BIOS, which is the basic input-output system, and I'll briefly explain what that is. The BIOS instructions are a critical component of computers, and this has been since the early days of computing. It has pretty much always existed within computing. The BIOS actually sits on a chip in the computer's motherboard. It issues a set of instructions for the computer's operating system to be able to load. So I talked about operating systems in the previous Error 404 video. A lot of people may think that firmware is the same thing. It actually isn't. It is the software or the facilitator to be able to allow the operating system to do what it is designed to do, as opposed to being two sides of the same coin. The other main purpose of a BIOS system is to assure that hardware functions are perfect and correct when the operating system is started. Aside from starting the operating system up, it's also running checks all of the time. It runs checks on the RAM and ROM amongst every other device or component. So this could be other types of memory, so OTP that I mentioned earlier. But it also runs it on processors. It runs it on pretty much everything to make sure everything is running exactly how it should do. It checks the CMOS, which is a complementary metal oxide semiconductor. It stores BIOS instructions amongst other chips. It then checks the signals to the RAM to make sure that we as consumers can use the device, and the operating system knows what actions to be able to take. So, for example, you click left click on your mouse, the operating system knows that you've done that. That is what that firmware is designed to do. It's designed to bridge the gap. The other type of firmware system is the EFI, which is Extensible Firmware Interface. This is the BIOS replacement in newer laptops, PCs, and mobile phones. It issues the instructions that a device CPU uses to start the hardware and bootloader. It ensures that only trusted software is boosted and other cybersecurity benefits as well. So how, finally, do you find your firmware version? Now, chances are, if you've had a purchase in the last 2 to 3 years of a very new computer, you're probably on the EFI system. Me, for example, I think I am on the BIOS system, because this PC that I've got is around 5 to 6 years old now, and it is starting to wear around a little bit, so I might need to replace that. But the way that you actually do find this on your PC is you open the device management folder within the control panel, and then you click the properties tab. What this should tell you is the type of operating system that you're running. It should tell you the type of firmware version that you're running, among various other things. What you can then do is obviously research the different types of firmware, seeing if maybe you want to change your firmware. Now, I'm not entirely sure how you would go about doing that, but that's maybe something I should look into for another Error 404 video. With that being said, thank you so much for watching this one, and if you did enjoy, leave a like, subscribe, and all of that good nonsense down there, I suppose. And until the next Error 404 video, goodbye for now.